Hey everyone, welcome to another BTM screencast. Today we're going over chapter 68 in the Carpentry book, Drywall Application. So drywall is used in light commercial and residential construction, and for this class we're going to focus on the residential construction portion. The reason it's used is it provides a smooth, unbroken, quality surface. So you'll see this a lot in houses, some of the classrooms here, restaurants, things along those lines. Drywall should not be delivered until shortly before installation. So drywall can get easily damaged with all the buzzing around going on a job site. So you want to make sure that it's put there, as it's needed rather than sitting around for weeks. So with everything else, this is the same. Always measure accurately. When we go to cut it, we're going to demonstrate this in lab. Uh, they demonstrate this in the next slide, I believe. But you score the face of the board and you use a T-square and you use a utility knife. So a T-square is exactly the way it sounds. It's like that. And we have them hanging in the tool closet. You'll use those and it'll help guide the knife when you cut. You always cut along the face, so that's the finished side of the board, and you break the board along the face that you scored. So you're going to take it, score it, and then snap it. After you snap it, you cut the back. So you can see right here, this individual cutting, this is the drywall T-square. Here's the knife, and they're scoring the sheet going that way. This is the face. So then when they stand it up, they're going to take it, snap it, and then they're going to score the back. And so this is what they're talking about, what I just said. The only difference is if you have a cut piece, you can use a tape measure to cut along. So if, let's say that we're cutting this is our piece of drywall, and we cut this here. Let's move this over to here. So this is the cut piece that we're using. You can use a tape measure to cut along this way. So here's an illustration of what we were just talking about. So here's the face again. The face was cut in this direction. It was snapped, so you could see that they snapped it towards them. Now, scoring from this side is a little bit difficult, especially on a 4-foot wide sheet of drywall, which this one is. I would suggest this person should have went around the back. Start at the bottom, go at the top, and then connect. And that way you don't have to worry about cutting yourself with the knife. Here's an example of the piece that they cut, and you can see that they're scoring it using their tape measure. So when you install drywall, you always want to make sure that your framing members are aligned. So in this case, we're going to be talking about studs. And stud edges should not be out of alignment more than 1/8 of an inch with adjacent studs. So that means if you're looking at a wall, you want it nice and straight, right? Those are your studs. You don't want this one. That one's no good. That's out of line with the other ones. One thing that's nice with ceiling joists is that they can be brought back if you use ribband or a strong bag. And we're going to go over that shortly. So here's one way that you could correct a wall. So you could see that they cut into the stud, and they're actually going to take the stud and pull it back in that direction. They're going to drive the shim, because what happens is that edge, it'll open up like that. So then you're able to go drive a stud or a shim in there and help take the crown out. Now for the ceiling, here's an example of what this looks like. So you can see your strong back, it looks like an L, and this goes across the top of your ceiling joists, and that'll help hold them on 16-inch centers that you need. The other option is the ribband here, and you can see that it's the same idea. The biggest difference between these is that this is attached to the joists, this one will be attached to your gable end stud, and the strong backs have more of an L shape, right, with the 2x6 here and the 2x4 here. And then you can see that your ribband here is just a 2x4. When we fasten our drywall or gypsum panels, they're going to be fastened with nails or screws. As we said before, no nails in here, just screws. Pressure should be applied to the panel near the fastener being driven to keep the panels tight to the joist or stud. So let's see what that looks like. So you can go and you can do the single nailing method. Again, don't worry about this because we're not going to be nailing drywall. We're going to be screwing it. Double nailing method, you can double forget this. It's not important. Here's an example of what that looks like. Again, not for BTM. Screw attachment. That's what we want to talk about. So you're allowed greater spacing when you're using screws. Screws have a greater fastening capability than what nails do. Space them 12 inches apart on center for ceilings and 16 inches on center for the wall. So why do you think that they would be closer on the ceilings than on the walls? We'll go over that in a little bit. So when you use adhesives, you want to apply a straight bead, 1/4 inch in diameter, to the center line of each stud. And again, we covered this in the previous chapter as to why you would use adhesives. Studs or panels are joined that require 2 beads of adhesive, so think about that. Where our sheets are going to go and butt up against each other, we're going to need 2 strips of adhesive on there, right? You don't want 1, you need 2. Wall applications require supplemental fasteners. So here we go, you can see that this is where 2 of our panels butt up against each other, and 1 bead of adhesive, 1 bead of adhesive. Again, remember, 1/4 inch. And here we have another one. So this is a pretty good idea if you want a nice round bead. So you can see that they took this, and not only is this side of the tip cut, but that side of the tip is cut. So it's cut in 2 different directions. And when you apply it like that, instead of it just bunching up, it'll come out in a nice round bead. So ceiling, they're typically installed first, and we'll go over that why in a little bit. There's several ways to do it, and we're going to go over those as well. So when you install to a ceiling, they're applied parallel or at right angles to joists or furring, same as walls. Measure, cut, and raise into position, so we'll cover 2 different ways on how to do that. And 2 people are typically needed unless a drywall jack is used. Even if you're using a drywall jack, it's helpful to have another set of hands there. So here we have 2 people, surprisingly, using a drywall jack. So this thing is kind of like a crane. So this wheel gets turned and it'll actually boom this up into position. And then the person here is kind of placing it, right? So you can see in this instance, they're running it at 90 degrees with the ceiling joists. So sometimes, instead of using the jack, a dead man is used. So these are a little trickier. I would definitely recommend using a drywall jack rather than a dead man. So care must be taken to make sure that fasteners are properly installed. This happens all the time. So believe it or not, when you get that and it's up there and it's installed, you'll have an inspector come in and then inspect the fasteners before you're allowed to finish it. So here we have the dead man. So in this instance, they made it out of 1x3. And you can take it, raise one end, raise the other, and see how this is bowed? That's because it's putting a lot of pressure on there. So when you have the jack can go and it pushes up against it. In this case, the dead man's cut a little bit longer, so then when it puts in, it's like a spring. And we can see that this one is run at 90 degrees, the ceiling joist as well. So let's talk about what some of the fasteners look like. So in a previous slide, we talked about how when you install them, that your drywall needs to be right up against your stud or your ceiling joist. So you can see in here, we have a nice little gap. This, we don't want. It's not against the framing. And this one, yeah, same thing. You could see we're not getting all the grip from the fastener that we possibly could because this is running up on an angle. This one is common. So when you install drywall, there's like a fine line in between getting it right where you need it and tearing the paper. The paper is what actually provides a lot of the strength for these. So if you install your fastener and this is recessed a little bit too far, that's no good because then it's just going to rip right out. If you install like this and it's on an angle, so you'll notice this if you do it and you go to finish it, there's going to be like a weird bump. Again, it's not what you want. The correct way to do it, of course, is the last one. Here, hold on, let's make this better. Right, this is the way that we want it, right at a 90-degree angle with what we're driving, a slight dimple in the paper, so then that way when we go and we apply our joint compound, we can go right over and make a nice smooth finish. So when you apply on walls, usually you do this after you do the ceilings. The top panel is installed against the ceiling first. So after you install the ceiling, you can cut the board for the wall to length and then stand it right up against the wall. Start your fasteners along the top edge and raise the sheet firmly against the ceiling and dry fasteners. So there's different ways to do this. So one thing to keep in mind is that when we're doing that, we don't want the drywall to come in contact with the floor. You always want to keep it up off the floor. And there's a couple ways to do that. And when you're ready for this performance assessment, we'll go over different options that you have. So again, keep in mind that this is for the horizontal application. So that's this way and your studs are running this way. Measure and cut the bottom panel and stand it against the wall. Raise it with a drywall foot lifter against the bottom edge of the top panel and fasten. So again, we want to keep this gap right between our drywall and our floor. And that's kind of what your panels will look like. And of course we have our fasteners that don't look quite like that, but they're all driven at nice 90-degree angles. So this is what it ends up looking like. So here's our bottom plate or our sole plate. And you can see right in here we have this little gap. And that's exactly what we want. When we come up top, imagine that your drywall ceiling panel is already here. And then here's the spacing for our fasteners. These are the edges that kind of round down and they're tapered, right? Because in here is where we're going to end up putting our joint compound. Smooth that out, raise that so it's a nice and flush finish. Here's what a drywall lifting hook looks like. So in this instance, these look like maybe they're Tim's, I can't tell. But this just slides right in, put your foot down on it, and it raises it up just enough to come in contact with the other panel and give you a nice gap underneath. So sometimes you have to make cutouts. You'll have to do this. So they're needed for outlet boxes, sounds familiar, ducts, which we won't do too much in the class, and similar objects. Cutouts can be made by plumbing and measuring the sides of the outlet box. So you can either go and then put this measure and cut out ahead of time, or you can do the drywall cutout tool, which this saves an incredible amount of time. This is kind of what they look like. This is one example. There's other brands like RotoZip and stuff like that. So when you're applying it vertically, so before we talked about it horizontal, right? And it looks like that. When we apply it vertically, it looks like this. So you want to start in the corners, right? Just the same way that we do when we apply our sheathing. And then go to your next one. Raise the sheet snugly against the ceiling and make sure that the tapered edge is plumb and centered on the stud. This is important because when you start in the corner, that's going to set the tone for the rest of them. So if you make a mistake here, it's just going to carry through and possibly get worse. So always make sure to correct as you go. And this is what it looks like. So you can see it's set up a little bit differently. And then our tapered edges are here. So when we apply our joint and compound, we'd come down here, right? And that's all. So to help prevent any nail popping, a floating corner may be used where no fasteners are used in the corner. Wall panels hold the ceiling panels in place. So this is what we talked about, why you install the ceiling first. So you could see in this instance that we're running 90 degrees with the joists. There's no fasteners in this corner, right? None. The first one that we're putting is about 7 inches off because this panel, we're taking and putting it right up against that one, and it's kind of acting as a fastener. So it's helping take that load from this little bit and transferring it to this sheet. And then because we're doing that, we're going to go about 8 inches to our first fastener, right? So we don't need to put them up here either. Curved surface application. So this gets more complicated. There's different ways to do it. So let's look at what that looks like. One way of doing it is you could stack this up like this. So if you have them, and then the finished side would be this way, right? So that raises it up, and then that way when you take it, it'll be nice and curved. This is another way of doing it. And of course, you can line them up against the wall. So this is a good time to say, this is how you don't put your dunnage for your drywall. So you can see in this instance, if we want to keep it straight, we'd want to put more here. And that's better than having it like this, because if you want to curve it on purpose, that's one thing. But if you're curving it by accident, that creates another issue altogether. So here we're talking about the minimum radii for gypsum board. In BTM, we're not going to worry about this. We're just worried about applying it so it's level, plumb, looks nice. We're not worrying about making a radius for anything here. So we talked about this in our previous chapter for bath and shower areas. So you want to use water resistant gypsum board or cement board. Framing is 16 inches on center, which that's typical, right? You want to apply the panels horizontally, check framing alignment, install blocking to fix as needed, and use corrosion resistant screws or nails. And again, we covered a lot of this in the last chapter. Multi-layer application. So again, for us, if we got more in depth into this, then we would talk about this. We don't, so don't worry about this for BTM. And this is just talking more about the multi-layer application for the base layer. So if you want, take your time, read about this, and if you have questions, we can talk about it on an individual basis. And then our face layer, again, same thing. If you want to talk about it, let me know, but it's not something that we need to cover in the class. In conclusion, it's essential that studs are in alignment. If they're not, you're going to get nice waves in your drywall as well. Accurate measurements are important. This is all the time, right? We don't want sloppy measurements. Panels may be fastened using nails, screws, or adhesives. Not in BTM, screws. Panels may be installed horizontally or vertically. So that's kind of it. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you next time.